Hello and welcome to Lesson 8A, continuing on with probability, fractions, and percentages. Today, students will be able to find the percent, the part, or the whole given the probability situation. Students will be able to discuss possible ways of breaking down percent problems to create a tape diagram. And this is important for real-world examples like finding the percent of homes with the TV on. All right, so today we are going to be looking at a lot of the same things as we did in the last lesson. It's just reminding you that you did see this last year. So for example, if 60% of the marbles in a bag are purple and there are 145 marbles in the bag, how many of the marbles are purple? So the probability of choosing a purple marble is basically you need to find out 60% of 145. Now we can definitely use the last lesson's methods. We can turn this to a decimal and multiply by 145, and if you're comfortable with that, that is fantastic. But we're just going to show a couple other ways of getting there. So let's remind you that you did see this last year. And last year, you might have used something like this table. And so the way that they set this up is you take that 60% right here, and you put it over 100. So it's 60 out of 100, because we know all percents are out of 100. If we reduce that by tens, that would mean it's 6 out of 10, or if we reduce it all the way, what I did was I divided the top and bottom by 2. We get 3/5. And so if we take this simplified fraction form of the percent, remember I'm just looking at this percent, last year you would have looked at it this way. So we take that 3/5, and that would be purple to total, and you keep the pattern going. 3/5 would be the same as 6/10, so I'm just adding 3 on the purples, 6 out of 10, 9 out of 15, next would be what, 12 out of 20, and you would keep going with that, making equivalent fractions on and on and on and on and on and on until you got to 145, because that's the total marbles in the bag. And then whatever goes with 145 would be the number of purple marbles. So if we continue with that, we keep going, we keep going, we keep going, we keep going forever, for a long time, then eventually you get to 87 right there. Okay, so that is one way you can do this if you don't get the algebraic method, but I suggest the algebraic method that we did in the last lesson. But this was what you did last year. So we did see this in tables when you were in 6th grade. You also saw tape diagrams. So same equation, same problem, 60% of 145, remember that's equivalent to 3/5 of 145. And so last year you would have set up this tape diagram where you cut it into 5 pieces, right? If you remember doing this. So go ahead and do this on your paper. We cut it into 5 pieces because that's the fraction, that's the denominator. And then you divide 145 by 5 to see what goes in every box. Because if you remember, tape diagram rule is that all the boxes have to be the same. So if we take that 145, we divide it by 5. 5 goes into 14 2 times, that gives us 10. We have 4 left over, bring down the 5, and 5 goes into 45 9 times. So that gives us exactly 45, nothing left. And so we would see in our tape diagram that we would have 29 in every box, 29 and 29 and 29 and 29 and 29 together make 145, right? 5 of those would make 145. So last year, you found 3/5 of 145 by doing that first, and then looking at 3 of those fifths. So if we put 29 and 29 and 29 together, we still get 87. Okay, so we're still getting the same answer either way, but these are 2 different methods that you used last year to do the same thing. Remember, we're still answering the same question, 60% of 145. It's just that you could use a table with the reduced fraction, or you could use a tape diagram with the reduced fraction. Okay, so there are these other methods if you like them. The other way was last year you saw part to whole. So you would know that percent over 100 would be equal to the part divided by the whole thing. And so we could set up that reduced fraction, 3/5, to be equal to 145 with that missing piece. So we could set it up this way also. You take the percent as a reduced fraction and you set it up to what you're trying to find, and we figured out that 5 times 29 would give us the 145, and so whatever we do to the bottom we also match up top, and 3 times 29 would get us to that 87 number. Okay, so 3 different ways of doing the same problem, though we can just use the method you used in the last lesson. So remember, the problem actually says to find 60% of 145. And so if we use the method that we used in the last lesson, we would change this to percent, swoosh, swoosh, to 0.6 of means multiply 145. And so if you do that, then we still get to our answer. So if we show this to the side, 145 times 0.6 would give us, let's see, 5 times 6 is 30, carry the 3. 6 times 4 is 24, plus 3 is 27, carry the 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. And we do have to watch that decimal placement, swoosh it in to match. So we still get 87. So that's our 4th method. This is the way we did the problems on the last lesson, but these other methods do still work. So there's our part to whole, there's our tape diagram, there's our table. So basically these part to wholes, tape diagram, and table all used the reduced form of the percentage. And that's how they get that. But that won't always work because sometimes our percentage is not a very nice number. Like if they gave you 27%, that wouldn't be a very nice fraction to reduce. So I still recommend doing these in the method that we chose in the last lesson. But let's go ahead and turn to the back of the page now and try some of these on our own. Number 2, find 60% of 180. And so 60% is that nice percentage that we were just using, and it does work well with tape diagrams and things, but I still want you trying that algebraic method. So let's change that, swoosh, swoosh, to 0.6 of means multiply, and then 180 is right there. And notice it just says find, so there is no like what number or whatever. We just have to do that multiplication. And so let's write that to the side, 180 times 0.6. 6 times 0 is 0. 6 times 8 is 48. Carry the 4. 6 times 1 is 6 plus 4 is 10. And swoosh it in. And so we get 108. All right, so then remember we would say 60% of 180 is 108 or 108. All right, so there's our answer. Again, you can use some different methods, but you should still get 108. What percent of 120 is 48? So remember, this is the same thing we were doing in the last lesson. What percent? X over 100 of means multiply. 120 is means equals. 48 is just 48. All right, in this situation, we can divide that. 120 divided by 100. Let's see, that's just gonna be 120 hundredths would be 1.2. X equals 48. And then here the X is attached to the number, and so this is that situation where we have to divide. And so I'm going to divide both sides by 1.2 to make that go away because what we don't know was attached to it, that X was attached. And there's our little division problem that we need to work out to the side. Again, just like the last lesson. We see a decimal in the bottom, can't divide by a decimal, swoosh it out, add a 0. And so what I'm really dividing is 480 divided by 12. All right, I know 12 can't go into 4. 12 goes into 48, though, 4 times. That gives me exactly 48. Nothing left, but I've got a 0 there. So I'll bring down the 0, and 12 goes into 0 times. All right, so we get that X equals 40. And so in this situation, what percent of 120 is 48? We would say, what is this? 40. There it is. 40%. Let's write our answer over here since I kind of used up that space. All right, here we go. 40% of 120 is 48. And I'm going to put a box around that answer. All right, so I want you to try number 4, please. I'm going to have you circle number 4. That's the one I want you to try on your own. 25% of what number is 12? See if you can figure that one out. raise your hand when you have that done. But before you move on to that one, let's do the last two problems. All right, so we see words. Oh no, not words. It's fine. Number 5, a box contains 60 marbles and 24 of them are brown. There's our whole thing, there's our part. I would see this as 24 out of 60 because I like to see that probability there, that proportion kind of set up. 24 out of 60. But then they do go on to say what percent of the 60 marbles are brown. So we can set this up with our words here. What percent, X out of 100, of 60 of the 60 is brown, equals are brown, is brown. And it told me that there are 24 brown marbles there. So we can set it up like that. And I'll just show you both. So remember 60 over 100, 60 hundredths would be the same thing as 0.60 or 0.6. X equals 24, where I then divide both sides by 0.6, 0.6. Swoosh it out once, add that 0. So I'm dividing 240 by 6. And so we get, let's see, 6 goes into 24. 4 times gives me 24, nothing left. Bring up that 0, so I get 40. All right, so that tells me it's 40%. 40% of the marbles are brown. Now, I could either use this method like we were doing in the last lesson, or I could just take this fraction and turn it to a decimal and then swoosh it out. So let's see what happens there. 24 divided by 60. 60 doesn't go into 24, 0.0. 60 goes into 240 4 times. Okay, so as a decimal, that would be 0.4, but swoosh, swoosh for percentage would still be 40%. So we still get the same answer. So you could either set that up as a fraction right away, part to whole, or you can use our keywords over here and still get the same answer. All right, last one. Number 6. A bag contains some marbles. All right, so this time, we don't know the total, but we know out of some marbles, 45 of them are green. So if we know 15% of the marbles are green, how many marbles are in the bag? Okay, so we know that 45 of them are green. That 45 is the 15%. So I went ahead and wrote out 45 is 15% of what number, so that you can see that. Otherwise, we would know that the 45 is the part. We're looking for the total, but we know it's going to be equal to 15 out of 100. Okay, so that's the other way you could set it up. But let's work with our words again, like we did in the last lesson. So 45 is 15% of what number? So 45 equals 15% as a decimal is 0.15 times what number means times X. We're going to take that and divide it by the 0.15. Again, remember we're dividing because that number was attached to the X, and that's what I need to get rid of. So now I've got 45 divided by 0.15, and we swoosh, swoosh twice, so swoosh, swoosh, add 2 zeros. So we are actually dividing 4,500 divided by 15. Now I know 15 goes into 45. 3 times exactly, that gives me 45, nothing left, and I just fill in those other zeros. And so right here we get 300 equals X. All right, so that means it was 300. Now we could see it here as well, that they took the 15 and they multiplied by 3, so we'll take the 100 and multiply by 3. But either way, both methods would work. Whatever works best for you, you are free to use, but you just need to answer the question here. So how many marbles are in the bag? There are 300 total marbles. All right, so make sure that you go back and work on number 4 on your own and raise your hand when you're done, and I'll check your work. Remember, when you raise your hand, you are also free to ask me questions. All right, that's it. Let me know how you do. Bye-bye.